looked me in the eyes like that, and he went, well, Roger, I just wouldn't want to see anything happen to you. And I thought, fuck me, the CIA are sitting in my house threatening me.
Keep your hand on your gun. Don't you trust anyone. Keep your hand on your gun. Don't you trust anyone.
This is Lowkey. Welcome to Truth to Power. This time we're joined by a musician who has sold millions upon millions of records as part of the band Pink Floyd. However, he chose to use that massive platform that he created to advocate for the rights of the dispossessed Palestinians by supporting BDS. He chose to support the political prisoner, Julian Assange, who's been conspired against by some of the most powerful governments in the world. Today, we welcome the thorn in the side of the establishment, the award-winning artist, rebel, and human rights warrior, Roger Waters. Roger, thank you so much for joining us. Let's take it back, though, to 2006, when you were invited to play at a gig in Tel Aviv.
What actually happened was they tacked Tel Aviv, Haikon Park in Tel Aviv, into the middle of a European tour that I was doing in 2006. And I sort of didn't notice, and even if I had noticed, I was still asleep in 2006. But thank goodness, due to the internet, I started getting lots of emails from people. And about the 20th email I got was from Omar Barghouti. And so I got in touch with him, and we had and we started to have conversations. He has got proper terrier spirit in it. Once he gets hold of the end of a fucking bone, he is not going to let go, which I adore, obviously. And so we had long conversations. So I cancelled very, very soon. I cancelled my sold out gig in a football stadium, Haikon Park in Tel Aviv. And once it had been explained to me that it was built on ancient, Palestinian graves and all that stuff. And but I did go to Israel, and I came up with a kind of compromise solution that I thought was a compromise solution anyway. Whether I was right and whether it was a good thing to do now, looking back, I'm in two minds about it. But we went and played at a venue called Neve Shalom in Hebrew, and it's called Awahat Asalam, I believe, in Arabic. And it's a ecumenical, multicultural, multi-religious based agricultural community growing chickpeas halfway between Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. It's somewhere there in the hinterland. And Muslims and Jews and Christians and Druze and blah blah blah, it doesn't matter what your religion is, which is very much the way I feel about the whole world. I don't give a fuck what your religion is. I care about the fact that you're my brother or my sister, because we're all human beings. So we did the gig there. It was the biggest gig they've ever had, or probably ever will have in Israel. I don't know. We were very, very late going on stage because there were like 10-hour long traffic jams of people getting there. And it was amazing. I think it was on my Dark Side of the Moon tour. I'm not sure. Anyway, we did the gig. The audience couldn't have been more appreciative. There was lots of, you're fucking great and all of that, which, you've got to love. And, but when we got to the end of it, I made a tiny little speech, like about a minute long. And I said, thank you so much for coming. And the food backstage was extraordinary and blah, 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 blah. Lovely white tents. And, we were treated like kings. And then I said, but, there's a problem here. And one of the problems, obviously, is there are no Palestinians at this gig because they're not allowed to travel and blah, blah. You are the young generation of young Israelis who have to take this problem into your hands, and you have to make peace with your brothers and sisters, and you have to move forward into a future where we have equal human rights and whatever. And they went from, we love you, oh, we love you so much, to boom. And you go, fuck me, this psychosis is powerful shit that I'm witnessing. I witnessed it. In that moment, I saw 60,000 people go from ecstasy to lobotomized, robotic, gone. Absolute absence of any presence of any kind, just because I suggested that they should stop treating the Palestinians like swine, like animals, like subhuman species. And so that something tick, that moment is what made my, whatever it was in my head that was resisting Omar saying, you shouldn't even have a cup of coffee in Israel because they're the subject of this boycott that we've just started, you know. So I went back the next year for a visit, under the protection of UNRWA, of the United Nations in Jerusalem. We went all over the West Bank, all over Jerusalem first, and then all over the West Bank. And so in 2007, which is now 14 years ago, 15 years ago, we saw the beautifully tarmac roads for Jews only. So I clocked that, oh, I see, you either have a white number plate or a yellow number plate. And that is what defines whether or not you're a human being or not. I'm going to use the fucking road. But I did go to Jenin. I did sit in a room with one of the elders in 2007. This elder said to me, he said, my children have discovered, the ones who've hit puberty, the 15, 16, 17-year-olds who were little children in 2002, and now they're teenagers, they've discovered a new way of committing suicide. They borrow a pair of scissors or a kitchen knife and walk towards a checkpoint. Boom. And the Israelis do the rest. They go, oh, here's another one. Bang! And they kill them dead on the spot. And that it's a way of, and I remember sitting there in that room with that old man with his worry beads talking to me in measured tones about how a whole generation of his children were killing themselves because they're completely given up hope. And you can imagine the trauma of those bulldozers coming through that refugee camp and clearing the way for the tanks so that they could get a nice free field of fire wherever, so that Jenin stopped being a potential problem for them in terms of logistics. And I've never been back, but I don't have to. Well, A, they won't let me. I am persona non grata, as you can imagine, to go across the Allenby Bridge or to land at Ben Gurion or whatever. Who? Oh, him? Are you kidding? No way, he ain't coming in here.
Yeah, I have a friend who was in Jenin at the time of the siege, and he told me really the horrific brutality of that situation. We live in a country that occupied 14 million miles of the planet, but yet we are tragically miseducated about the rest of the world. I guess my question to you is, when you think about the process that played out in 2006, you went to a place and were educated about it by a local person and came into contact with indigenous people there, and it led to a visceral change in you and the way you perceived social injustice in that particular part of the world. You know, as musicians, we go places, we travel to tour, we eat, we sleep, we perform. Some of us might party, but we get up in the morning and we leave. Whereas you went there and embraced something and started to see the sort of stratification of that society and then take an active role in changing it. We're reaching an interesting time. It's like with Rock Against Racism, you saw them directly confronting musicians and saying, is this what you stand for? And with a few of those that they sort of confronted, you saw a progression in their views towards a different kind of way of understanding racism. However, today, are we in the same space where we can literally call out and confront particular artists and say, well, actually, by doing this particular gig, you are complicit with Zionist apartheid in Palestine? Do you think we are reaching a point where that is possible, where a movement like that can really seriously develop?
I've got a fucking, drawers full of the letters that I've written to people whose names you would recognize, who sometimes not very politely told me to fuck off.
Wow.
And that they're musicians and that they don't care about, and politics shouldn't be part of any of this and blah, blah. Stephen Van Zandt being I've got the emails from him. He actually, in one of his emails to me, says, you need to be very careful. Your career could be over in a heartbeat. He said that to me in an email, This is little Stephen, and I appealed to him a number of times before I gave up. He's probably not a bad bloke, but people become so entrenched. It's a bit like, let's think about this now, because you're right. And when you were talking to me about what can we do and what this and that now maybe a moment, it is. There were 150,000 people who aren't all in rock bands out on the streets of London with their Palestinian flags. Now it's not a huge number. Let us never forget that there were 1 million of us in the streets in 2003, Valentine's Day or the day after or whenever it was, like a month before the invasion of Iraq, saying, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it. Tony Blair, please, this is insanity. What is wrong with you? Anybody with an IQ above fucking room temperature can see there are no weapons of mass destruction. Saddam Hussein is probably a complete arsehole, but this is not grounds for going and starting a war and destroying a country. Well, because of course it had nothing to do with any of that. It was on their agenda. It's part of their agenda. They decided that they were going to destroy Gaddafi first, and that we're going to destroy Iraq, and then the one we have to worry now is on that list, and the jewel in the crown, now that they've failed in Syria so far, is Iran. That is the jewel in the crown of the neocon agenda to destroy that whole area of the world that we call the Middle East.
Yeah.
And they've made a pretty good start to it. Anyway, sorry.
Not at all, Roger. I agree with you. It's been proven by the Spy Cops inquiry that since 1968, 1,000 political groups in this country have been infiltrated by a special branch. It can include Vegans Unite in Nottingham. It's a vegan group. Houseman's Bookshop in King's Cross was infiltrated. The Hedgehog Rescue Committee on a small Scottish island. All the usual suspects. Roger, you have taken these positions, which are very commonsensical to me. Nothing you are saying is untrue, but you are causing a lot more damage to people in power than people in Scotland that are protecting endangered species, by my estimations. Do you think that you've been spied on for anything you are saying and doing?
Are you fucking kidding? I fucking well hope so. If you're not surveilling me, it's a fucking insult. So some bloke, ex-CIA, came and sat in my house, this house I'm sitting in here now in New York City, one day, and started trying to explain to me that I would have more effect and more power. Wouldn't you rather be Martin Luther King than Malcolm X? What are you talking about? Well, here's a graph. I've had a lot of these come at me. Here's Martin Luther King, a little bit to the left of center, but everybody loves him and adores him. And here's Malcolm X over here, who everybody hates and whatever. Wouldn't you rather be Martin? don't you think you should move your position a bit closer to the middle ground of blah, 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 blah. And this goes on for a bit. But about an hour later, this bloke looked me in the eyes and I said, what are you suggesting here? You know, because it was getting a bit more specific. And he looked me in the eyes like that. And he went, well, Roger, I just wouldn't want to see anything happen to you. And I thought, fuck me, the CIA are sitting in my house threatening me. And I didn't blink or anything or say, what the fuck do you think you're doing? You're threatening me in my own house. I just went, ooh, this is interesting. Mm-hmm. This guy used to run the Middle East desk for the CIA.
Well, you know what they say, Roger, that once you work for the CIA, you never don't work for them. There's no such thing as a former employee of the CIA.
I'm sure they're correct in that.
I remember not long after Corbyn was elected as leader of the Labour Party, there was a statement from a high-ranking general within the British Army saying that if Corbyn were elected Prime Minister, there would be a mutiny, and in fact implying that there would be a coup against him. We saw numerous anonymous statements from people within the intelligence services saying that Corbyn was somehow a threat to national security. We also saw British soldiers in Afghanistan shooting at pictures of Jeremy Corbyn as if they were using it for target practice. It's pretty clear to all concerned that the establishment in this country were pulling out all the stops to prevent the coming to power of a pro-people movement as represented by Jeremy Corbyn. On top of that, we also saw the widely pushed mantra that Corbyn was somehow something to do with anti-Semitism. How much of that do you think was at the behest of, or at least stoked by, the Israel lobby in this country?
Go and watch the two documentaries made by Al Jazeera, The Lobby and The Lobby USA, because it's all there. It's all there. All the evidence is there. Everything is there of how the Israeli lobby, with people from the Israeli embassy, this one young kid who's from the Israeli embassy, how they all conspired together to destroy the careers of, if they could, Duncan, whatever his name was, the Labour MP, and and eventually Jeremy Corbyn. They interfere. Talk about interfering in elections. They completely destroyed the whole Labour campaign into the 2019 general election and gave the election to the Tories. And also in the wake of that destruction of Jeremy Corbyn through a terrible lying, cheating smear campaign that Jeremy Corbyn is anti-Semitic. That's like calling me an anti-Semite. Jeremy Corbyn is an anti-racist. Jeremy Corbyn is a man of principle. Jeremy Corbyn is the antidote to Blairism. Tony Blair almost entirely destroyed the Labour movement in England by going over to the other side, by being a traitor to not his class, because he never was working class. He never was part of the Labour movement. He was from fucking Charterhouse or some other posh public school. So Blair was always a horrible cancer in everything, but Jeremy Corbyn somehow managed to start to rebuild a Labour Party that was based upon the idea of a more equitable society that did believe in human rights and a more equitable distribution of wealth and blah and blah and blah and all those things. He was like a breath of fresh air that reintroduced to us the scent of Michael Foot and Anti-Wedgwood Ben. Okay. And dare I go back to the end of the Second World War, Clement Attlee, even although he was somewhat patrician, sorry, that's the word I was looking for. So Jeremy Corbyn was the future of the Labour Party, and they decided they did not want somebody who cared about human rights and about the Labour movement and about working people and about an equitable distribution of wealth. They didn't want them there. And they also didn't want somebody who would not slavishly follow the foreign and domestic policies of the apartheid government of Israel. So taking those two things together, they went, well, let's get rid of him then. And they did. The right wing of the Labour Party, represented now by Sir Keir fucking Starmer, and the rest of them, along with people from the Israeli embassy in London, conspired with others to create this witch hunt. And it wasn't just Corbyn they got rid of. They got rid of anybody who had left-wing views in the Labour Party, and they did it all by claiming they were all anti-Semitic. It was brilliant and disgusting. It was disgusting, and somehow they got away with it. We're fighting it. I'm involved in court cases in London. I'm working quite closely with one of the people who is being sued for defamation by John Ware. John Ware, the director who made the disgusting Panorama hit piece called Anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. So I'm working with Naomi and others who were thrown out of the Labour Party on the grounds that they were anti-Semitic. It wasn't on those grounds. It was on the they're not, obviously. It was on the grounds that they were left-wing, and they didn't want interfering with their connivance and their acceptance of the Blairite, disgusting Blairite principles that were brought into the Labour Party back in those days. So that's what it's about. But the fight goes on. I'm actually funding a little bit of it because there's no, because it comes down to how long can you spend in court? How deep are your pockets?
Yeah.
Who are the other side? How deep are their pockets? They're deep. Panorama, the BBC, that's the thing about England that makes me almost more angry than anything else, is that the BBC would be putting out this claptrap.
I wonder if you've come across something called the Lucas Plan, Roger. We interviewed not so long ago one of the important figures in it, Brian Salisbury. The Lucas Plan was focused around a company called Lucas Aerospace, who, among other things, made arms. They were in a situation where they were having their jobs cut, and they appealed to Tony Benn at the time to help them nationalize the company and keep their jobs safe. Now, what Brian Salisbury told us is Ben replied to them that first he would like them to go away and write a list of contraptions that they could make with their expertise that were alternatives to arms. Essentially, things that were for the social good. So Brian and his colleagues went away and produced a list of over 70 items, among them dialysis machines at a time where people were dying from a shortage of dialysis machines, hybrid engines, and other contraptions that had some form of social use. Some of them, which today, 40 to 50 years later, are now seen as completely the norm. However, unfortunately, the Labour government under Harold Wilson, rather than helping them and coming through on Tony Benn's promise, they actually continued to subsidize the company, Lucas Aerospace, and had, as is often the case, an incestuous relationship revolving door whereby employees from the MOD went directly into Lucas Aerospace, top brass, and vice versa. And in the end, a lot of those who came up with the Lucas plan lost their jobs.
Sorry, I have to interrupt you. Who was the
Yeah.
bloke that you were talking to?
His name's Brian Salisbury, but we'll send you the documentary. It's called The Plan That Came From the Bottom Up by a director called Steve Sprung. But what was interesting is that Corbyn and McDonnell integrated this idea into their defense diversification plan. You know, BAE Systems is the biggest arms company in this country, yet it's only worth something like 0.6% of Britain's GDP. I think that some of the largest companies in this country are arms companies. And you know, if we think about it, there are studies that have shown that for every $1 billion which is invested in the arms trade, you only create around 11,000 jobs. However, if all of that money, that $1 billion, is invested in clean energy, it's believed to produce around 16,000. Whereas if you also produce jobs in the education industry with that $1 billion, you're looking at between 26 and 30,000 jobs being produced with the same $1 billion.
Of course. So please send me the documentary. But I'm so happy you're telling me this, because no wonder they had to get rid of him. That is a very obvious, simple, brilliant, but hugely fundamental ideologically idea. Imagine that translated to the United States of America, where they diversify the weapons manufacturers so that every single fucking state has a little piece of that pie, so they can be absolutely certain of maintaining the support of every single Congress district, almost in the whole of the United States, to be zipped up about any reduction in the 700 billion that they spend on weapons manufacturing. You get people to work, pay fucking taxes, and then divvy it up. That's what the arms trade is. That's what war is. War is that. That's what war is. And people die. Who gives a fuck? Whatever. Fuck them. And we're making money. We're getting people who work to pay taxes so that we can put it in suitcases and go into back rooms and divvy it up.
Also, Roger, you know, we have been tirelessly over the past 4 years trying to raise awareness about what happened at Grenfell. This was, again, a story of deep corporate irresponsibility. You saw a company like Arconic that has not only built buildings that are unsafe for people, but also built the F-35 fighter jet with BAE Systems and Lockheed Martin. And we're in a situation where the main shareholder, the major shareholder in Arconic, is a company called Elliott Management. It's a hedge fund, which the founder and president of it is Paul Singer. Now, Paul Singer also contributes money to the Friends of the IDF and Birthright Israel. So, you know, you see the interconnection between a lot of these different issues. The F-35 also, of course, is one of the IDF's prized possessions, really, as a fighter jet. Isn't it interesting how these things intersect? You know, and in this case of the micro confronting the macro, so people asserting collective power to stand up to massive corporations. When we're talking about this, it leads me to the case of Stephen Donziger and Chevron. Could you tell me a bit about your involvement with that case?
He was the lead attorney in a case against Chevron Corporation that from 1993 until 2011, when they won the case finally. A case because Chevron, it was Texaco was the company that Chevron bought, so they bought the debt. Texaco dumped billions of gallons of toxic waste into the Ecuadorian rainforest and have rendered it uninhabitable. So cancer is absolutely rampant. My friend Paul Lopez Nino, who runs Amazon Watch, who's a lovely guy, we've become quite close friends, described it brilliantly as saying, slow motion mass murder is what Chevron Corporation are guilty of up there. And they're trying to hang Donziger out to dry And to some extent, they're succeeding, but we are making a dent in it.
More power to you. I mean, the things I've read about are truly horrifying, with Chevron putting it into legal strategy to demonize him. Would you consider him a corporate political prisoner?
Yeah, I would, like Julian Assange.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, that although they're in different businesses, Donziger is an attorney, he's a professional lawyer, and Julian Assange is a publisher. He's a professional newsman. But they are being demonized, and they are both being punished and held to account. Donziger's situation obviously is far less extreme than Julian Assange's, because Donziger is wearing an ankle bracelet. He's been in home detention for very nearly 2 years now. 660 days he's been in home detention. Whereas Julian Assange, they're trying to kill.
Yeah.
And they're being allowed to do it. Boris Johnson is allowing the United States government to continue with their attempts to kill Julian Assange for the crime of telling the truth. Exactly the job that he signed on for as a member of the press and as a publisher. It's exactly what he ought to be doing, and he should be lauded for it and encouraged to do more of it, because we, the people, need the Julian Assanges of this world to do that important job. So to allow the powers that be to kill him would be monstrous, which is why we're all working as hard as we are. If we kill Assange, we're killing everyone. That is the end of the human race if you kill Assange. Because what you're saying is that you give free rein to big business. Corporate business, the oligarchical dystopia, runs the whole of the Western world, and the Western world, by and large, is in control of the whole world. That's why they can keep people starving and kill anyone they want and do all that, and not listen ever to anybody who says, hold on a minute, Paris 1948, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, said that we're all brothers and sisters and we should all have equal rights, that we should have the right to life. That's number one. They don't believe that. They go, no, they can't have the right. Well, fuck them, kill them. You know, the right to food, the right to shelter, the right to healthcare, and the right to education. What? No, they can't have any of that. Fuck them. We're trying to make a living here. You know, I mean, I know it's not funny, but it's the reality of the, hang on a minute. We've been plundering and raping the planet for the last 400 years and it works fine. What the fuck would we want these people to have rights for? No, absolutely. But as a matter of political expediency, they have to pretend. It's like Joe fucking Biden sitting there in the White House. He pretends he cares about human rights, but when you say, what about Sheikh Jarrah? What about the Palestinians' human rights? Or don't they count? Oh, the screen went blank. What, is that too difficult a question? Yeah, it is, because if I answered that question truthfully, the whole miasma of pretense that we care about democracy or human rights or liberty or life or education or health or shelter or any of those things that we pretend we care about would disappear. And it would become obvious, if I answer that question, it would become obvious that I don't give a fuck about it. All I want is power, and to maintain the position of power that the people I work for, who are the oligarchs, want. Bill Gates and Mark Zuckerberg, they can run the world, or think they're running the world, because we can sort of control them, because they care about the same things we do.
Have you ever considered making a song about Assange?
Have I? No, I haven't, but maybe I should.
It would definitely lend some much needed visibility to him. I think the problem is they've done such a good job of alienating the rest of the public from him. and leading them to believe that his case has very little to do with the rest of them. You know, UN reports have said that he's been tortured by multiple governments, and it's really important to note which are those governments that have been involved in trying to imprison him for the rest of his life. When WikiLeaks' work targeted many different governments, from the UAE to France to Iran, to China. These are governments that would have had a problem with something Julian Assange had done, but what he's being punished for specifically is his Guantanamo, Afghanistan files, and others that specifically pertain to the United States and its foreign policy. But, you know, I think it would be great. It's just an idea.
But, you know, why don't you, I'm going to dump on you now and say, why don't you put that together? I'll do it. That would be great. If you take the responsibility of putting us together and figuring out what to do, I would love to do that.
Wow, amazing, Roger. You heard it here first, people. You're going to hear a song, me and Roger Waters, for Julian Assange. Thank you so much for joining us today, Roger. It's been emotional.